The Cincinnati Bengals have a new head coach, sort of. They've got some new assistants, sort of. Kind of depends on the way you look at it. And obviously there are a lot of feelings and there's a whirlwind of news now that the season is over for the Cincinnati Bengals. Usually they remain pretty quiet this time of year because they keep their coaching staff intact. That's kind of been the case, and it kind of hasn't. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. I'll be joined shortly by my co-host, Scott Schultz. We'll be talking about all of the coaching moves, non-moves, whatever you want to call it. I want to hear from all of you guys. I know Scott does as well, about your thoughts on the hiring or rehiring of Marvin Lewis, retaining some of his top assistants, as well as potentially some top assistants leaving. And we'll talk about all of that. And then we'll talk about what is the future for Andy Dalton now that Lewis is back. There were some questions about Andy Dalton's future and what might happen to him in a year that the team has a opt-out of sorts in their contract. There's also some weird things happening with A.J. McCarron that need to be sorted out. And this draft is loaded with quarterbacks. There's more news about that. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. I want to start off, though, as before we dive into the coaching stuff, before we dive into what has happened over the first couple of weeks. First of all, I want to wish you all a happy new year. Hopefully you had a Merry Christmas. We did take a week off last week just because of the holiday and everything. So we missed you guys, but it, we kind of needed a little break. And little did we know that so much more would be coming up now after the new year. We kind of thought maybe maybe a new head coach, maybe some other stuff, but there's a lot to talk about. I do want to say this. The Bengals finished the year strong, regardless of if it being a wasted year. They ended the season with 2 quality wins, knocking out 2 teams that were headed to the playoffs. And, I'll ask Scott a little bit about how much that played into the coaching hire. But for those that didn't know, Buffalo, the Bills made the playoffs because of the Bengals beating the Ravens, and Buffalo has been they haven't been to the postseason in like 17 years. So if you haven't noticed, and this is a little public service announcement, I guess, and a little bit of a self-serving one for myself. The Bills fans and Bills players and all of that have donated massive amounts of money to Andy Dalton because of his comeback win. Now, obviously, kind of stinks that other people want to donate to a charitable foundation because of a win, but it's become a really cool story. So I want to urge you guys that if you have a cause finding worthwhile, if I know it's hard to say, hey, give money to a Bengals player's cause because some of you might be very upset with the direction of the team right now, understandable, but if you find a cause that you're passionate about, or if you want to get involved in some of these charities that the Bengals players are in locally, if you live in Cincinnati, I am heading up one for those of you who have tuned into this program. Unfortunately, I lost my sister a couple of months ago in a very shocking and sudden way. So if you want to donate to that, we are donating money to high school students looking to get a college education. LisaCosenzafund.org site will be live probably tomorrow, and it's on GoFundMe. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Whether you want to donate to the Andy Dalton Fund, if you feel inclined to donate even just a little list amount to the foundation that I'm running, cancer research, whatever the case may be, let's maybe try and get the new year off on a positive note. Unfortunately, 2017 for a lot of people was not the greatest year, not the most positive year, and maybe doing some community service work, maybe donating some money to worthy causes may help get your year off to a good start. Just a thought, food for thought. I don't want to tell you what to do. I don't want to tell you to preach, but, just throwing it out there. Well, guys, that being the case, Marvin Lewis has been re-signed for 2 years with the Cincinnati Bengals. As the Bengals headed into the game, I believe it was against the Vikings, excuse me, there was news that Marvin Lewis was not going to come back to Cincinnati, broke by Adam Schefter of ESPN. And now it's completely the different case. I think the way the team played the final 2 weeks probably had something to do with it. And the fact they went 2-0, beat a division rival, beat two playoff-bound teams at the time, probably had something to do with the return. Maybe this was just in the works all along. And I really, really thought that after 15 years, after an 0-7 playoff record, and back-to-back losing seasons here, that I thought it was time. And I thought, especially not necessarily the last two games that they won, but the two disastrous games before that, the Bears and the Vikings, and the one even before that, the Steelers game, Marvin Lewis looked defeated. He looked done. He looked like a guy that didn't want to coach anymore, at least not in Cincinnati, to me. I don't want to overanalyze body language. I don't want to overanalyze, I don't know the man personally. I've met him a couple of times. Nice man. Done a lot of good things for the Bengals overall, but I don't know him personally, so I don't know what his headspace was, but he seems to be re-energized now that he's got this contract. If you listen to his press conference, if you read some of the stuff either through cincyjungle.com, the Cincinnati Enquirer, Bengals.com, if you read any of the stuff that he had come out and said on the press conference today, you would see that he's re-energized. Marvin Lewis is the most polarizing Bengals figure that I can remember. And I've been a fan of the Cincinnati Bengals since I was 6 years old. I try and be as objective as possible because I write for them. I do this show. And, obviously there's the entire spin is, we're fans that do this show and we're fans that write about them on Cincy Jungle, but we try and be objective. But to me, he is the most polarizing figure I think the Bengals have ever employed. And, there are players that are absolutely hated. There are coaches that are hated. There are people that have indifferent attitudes. Obviously some players that left after doing so many great things for Cincinnati, left on a sour note. People have some bad feelings about that. Marvin Lewis is a guy that, because he is a nice man, because he's done a lot in the city of Cincinnati with his foundation and everything, and because he has brought the Bengals out of the doldrums of the 1990s, so many people have these nostalgic feelings about him. And I do as well. I remember 2003 when the Bengals almost made the playoffs. I remember 2005 when that was the most fun year, other than being a little kid watching the 1988 Super Bowl. That was the most fun year in a long time. I remember 2009 when they were picked to not be very good and they were on Hard Knocks, and that was a heck of a fun year. I remember 2011 through 2015. 2011, Mike Florio and others, I specifically remember, picked the Bengals to go winless in 2011. The Bengals went 9-7 and made it to the playoffs. I also, as I just said, I remember the playoff losses. I remember the absolute domination of the Bengals under Marvin Lewis in second halves of games that they were either well ahead or very important games that they needed to win. And they needed to come out in the second half and I hate to use a Marvinism, but do better. Point blank. Now we're looking at some changes on the staff, but we're also looking at some guys being brought back from last year. What changes to remedy these issues? Okay. We know Marvin Lewis will make this team competitive. We know this roster does have talent, even though they have some injuries and there were some holes that were exposed the last 2 years. We know this team has talent. There's no doubt. What though, when you keep Marvin Lewis, you keep Darren Simmons for special teams, you keep Bill Lazor as offensive coordinator, and you keep, and there's others that I like that they kept, but I guess I look really at Marvin Lewis and Bill Lazor, and I sit here and I say, well, I don't know if you're keeping two coaches that headed up two of the critical areas that failed in 2017. I don't know how that changes in 2018 and 2019 as Marvin Lewis goes on. You kept your most important coach. You kept your head coach. And under this head coach, there have been massive successes and there have been even more massive failures. And I saw already in the YouTube chat, and thank you for bringing them in. But Aaron Siegel, I feel numb. I don't care about the draft, free agency, anything. I have no excitement for next season. Chris Berrien, they had one job after the Ravens game, hire a new damn coach, and they can't even get that right. I saw one earlier, I believe it was from Bass Hunter, saying I need to tear into Mike Brown, and that's an easy target as well. And I think we know at this point that Mike Brown does what is safe. And safe isn't always a bad thing. If the devil you know and the devil you don't, right? I mean, the Bengals could have gone out and hired a Josh McDaniels, a Pat Shurmur, a whoever, all of the names that not only became available on Black Monday, but the names that have been kicked around over the past handful of months. They could have grabbed those guys. Pat Shurmur could have had, a season similar to what he had when he was with Cleveland, a terrible one. The Bengals could have, Josh McDaniels could have got him out to a hot start like he did with the Broncos in his season there, and they ended up 6-10. So, that's Mike Brown's rationale, whether you like it or not. I don't particularly like it. I guess I understand it, but I don't particularly like it. But Mike Brown, you have to know, Mike Brown plays it safe. He also plays it convenient. If it's convenient for him, Mike Brown plays to loyalty, to a fault. His father did the same. And that's why we have what we have here with Marvin Lewis returning to the Bengals. I think I am joined now by Scott Schultze. Scott, how are you doing, my friend?
Frigid. I'm almost joined. Just trying to stay warm. It is, I think, the highest temperature we've had since Christmas has been maybe 15 degrees. And
cool.
So like yesterday when I went to work, it was minus 16 outside. So not exactly the most, warm.
That's chilly. Did you have a good holiday, my friend?
Yeah, other than the fact we just stayed inside because, when it's 0 degrees outside at noon, there's not a whole lot to do.
Yeah, I don't blame you. All right, Scott, I'm just diving in. Thoughts, reactions. Marvin Lewis signs a 2-year deal. I think at best my feelings are mixed. I was disappointed. I thought a new direction should have been maybe the way the Bengals could have gone, but maybe you have some other thoughts. I also am curious to know from you if you thought the 2-game win streak at the end of the season against the Lions and the Ravens, two teams that were headed to the playoffs, and the Bengals beating them, if that really actually kind of reopened Mike Brown's eyes, or if you think this was just part of the plan all along.
My assumption, granted, none of us are Mike Brown. We don't really know what Mike Brown's thinking, which might be a good thing sometimes. But I think the last 2 games had to play a part because you figure if they don't win those games, they would have been 5-11. So you went 6-9-1, and then 5-11. It's very difficult to justify bringing them back. They had tons of struggles. Nothing's really going right. You turn that around, instead of 5-11, you're 7-9. You have that 2-game winning streak, and sorry, got distracted. So you turn that around. You have that 2-game winning streak. You knock 2 teams out of the playoffs. But the frustrating thing is that's just what Marvin Lewis does. You look at some of his other years when they had bad seasons, he wins those meaningless games, and I don't think that should have any bearing in him keeping his job because that's just what he does. He can't coach. He can't win the games you need to win. You go back to 2008. They were 1-11-1. lined up for a great draft pick. They win 3 pointless games at the end of the year. 2 years later, 2010, kind of the same thing. They started out 2-11. They win 2 of the last 3 games. This year, they're 5-9. They win the last 2 games. I can't really explain why he wins these meaningless games, and I don't know why that should have an impact. I just think it does, because I just don't know how the Bengals can sell, hey, we went from 12 wins to 6 wins to 5 wins. Let's do it. But since you can say, hey, we went from 6 to 7, we can blame injuries on, Tyler Eifert, on, the offensive line, on this and that. And we can say, hey, look, we're going the right direction. We're making some little changes. We're, getting rid of Paul Alexander or whatever. Look, we're making these steps. Stay with us. And so I think I'm not buying it, but I think it's easier for them to sell, to justify that. That's what. So to answer your second question, yeah, I think that the wins did have a impact, even though I don't think they should have. The first question you asked was, I guess the immediate response, I want to say dumbfounded, but I don't know how you can be dumbfounded when this is just the kind of thing they do. And this was something we do a article on cincyjungle.com every week during the season, where we talk with a writer from an opposing team's site. So, the Ravens last week, the site for the Lions, the Bears, and so forth. And we ask questions back and forth, and we post our answers. One question I got maybe the last 3-4 weeks was pretty much the same question. And it was, what are you guys going to do after Marvin Lewis? What's this team going to look like after Marvin Lewis? Who are some coordinators? What direction is the team going to go? So everyone pretty much outside of Cincinnati was pretty convinced Marvin's gone. In a rational world, our team would be getting rid of him. Clearly the Bengals are. So what are you going to do going that direction? And unfortunately, every time I answered that question, I kind of gave him the same answer of, I really don't want to cross that road until we're there. I don't want to start thinking about, the next coach. I don't want to start thinking about assistants, college coaches, because granted, everything's lined up for this guy to finally be fired after 15 years. But until they actually do it, I'm just not confident they're going to do it. And, I said that just, knowing the history, not expecting it to actually come to fruition. You kind of figure at some point, 10 years turns to 15. And I just don't know what I can say that hasn't been said either on our site in articles, in the fans section. We have tons of comments, obviously. And I'm sure the stuff you started with, and, everyone listening, I'm sure has their own thoughts and comments. I know Cincinnati area radio has been covering it, national radio and media and TV, because it's all the same thing. It's just this, what in the are they thinking? And, it brings the question, I don't know if you brought this up, but the thought process of Mike Brown, what can you possibly be thinking to bring this guy back? And I don't know, is that something that you brought up already?
A little bit, but I didn't go in depth. So I want to, I want to talk about that. And I thought, first of all, I thought you made a really excellent point with how Marvin Lewis ends seasons. And in the poor seasons, his team wins games. In the good seasons, at the end of the season, they don't win the games. And they've lost either, whether it's by sitting guys, choking. I can remember 2003, they just needed to beat the Browns. They lost. 2006, they needed to win one game of the final 3 or 4. They lost like all of them. The list goes. 2015, even 2005, they sat guys. They lost positioning. Then they had to play the Steelers. We all know how that played out. So, I don't. That's one thing I really think should be an underlying focus, is how this team ends games and how they end seasons under Marvin Lewis. And that's something that's very concerning to me. Now, I mentioned, you asked me about Mike Brown. Before you got on here, really, I think we know, if you've been a fan of the Bengals at any point or any extended period of time, you would know Mike Brown likes to play it safe. He likes to play it conservative. He likes to stick with what he knows, and he likes to put his hand in the pot, and he likes to have say on certain decisions. I'm seeing some rumblings in our YouTube chat that John Ross was a Brown pick. Marvin Lewis wanted Reuben Foster. Who knows if that's actually accurate? But I guess I wish this move had come with additional moves, if that answers your question. Maybe Marvin gets a little bit more control, but they need additional inside hires, GMs, scouts. That would make me a bit more comfortable with Marvin Lewis coming back if he had beefed up the rest. Now, maybe that's coming. I highly doubt it, but maybe that's coming. And, I think we know Mike Brown's some of his MO, right? I mean,
yeah, I think to your point about what they do, I think the defensive coordinator hire will tell us a lot as far as the direction. It was nice to see Paul Alexander finally relieved, as much as that offensive line's kind of been turned from good to bad to worse. And there were obviously some of our position coaches I think could have been let go. And I think the defensive coordinator hire will tell us a lot about, okay, how much control is there? Who has control? What direction are they doing? Are they just going to throw someone like Coyle or Haslett in there? Or are they really going to get a really good defensive coordinator? Someone that probably may have been a really good one, became a head coach and is now available as a coordinator, or maybe some top college guy, or do what they did. Yeah, when they brought John Gruden on the offensive side, he came, I think, from the Arena League, but he was a very good player that was kind of under the radar. And when they brought him in, did well, became a head coach, for the Redskins. So are they going to do something like that? So I think the defensive coordinator hire will tell us how much of a change they're really looking at. To me, Mike Brown reminds me of the guy who is overweight and wants to lose some weight. And I'm not saying that because he's heavier, but I'm just saying, that mindset, the guy's like, yeah, I'm 300 pounds, when I was younger, and in high school, I was 150. I'd like to get back down to, I don't like being 300 anymore. I want to be 150, 200. That'd be kind of nice. And so you ask him, okay, so what are you doing about it? Well, I go walking once every couple of weeks, for a few minutes. I drink, diet ice cream instead of regular, I don't know, first, whatever, low cal ice cream, little things, but not really a whole lot. And then you see him a month later, a year later, hey, I'd still like to lose. Would you like to if you ask him if he'd like to win a championship, of course he's going to say yes. I mean, no one wants to say, I don't want to win. I have no interest. I mean, clearly every owner wants to win. The question is, well, how committed are you? I mean, there's the guy who, Mike Brown's the guy, oh yeah, let me, whatever's easy and convenient, doesn't cost me any money. Now you could go to the extreme, someone like the Browns, who are constantly changing gears and not getting anything done. They're the ones that see the ab lounge and the treadmill and the gazelle and all the stuff on the infomercials. They buy it, it shows up a month later, it sits in the box for a couple of weeks, they assemble it, use it once or twice, it goes in the garage, and then it goes to their garage. But at least they're trying something. Now they're not getting anything, but at least they're trying. Mike Brown's kind of like the guy, I'd like to, it'd be nice to, I just don't want to do the things I need to do to get it done. And that's the thing that's very frustrating for fans, because fans, at some point we want to see that happen. And it's just so frustrating to see someone who is not making that happen, who doesn't seem to be willing to make that happen.
Right. And, we could talk about, Marvin Lewis, I think I compiled his AFC North record since joining the Bengals. He's 2 games over 500 and awful against Pittsburgh. And I think maybe, people are asking, we can conjecture all you want. I've met Mike Brown. He's a nice elderly man. Very affable when I talk to him, but and I know some current and former Cincy Jungle colleagues have also met him and have said the same thing. As a man, unfortunately, I think he just has too much overconfidence in his abilities as a football guy, and it just continues to hurt the team. And maybe he sees the dichotomy of continuity with Pittsburgh and Baltimore, continuity with Pittsburgh and Baltimore at the head coaching positions, the mess that's in Cleveland. And even though he doesn't have a Mike Tomlin, his organization isn't run the same way as Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Maybe that's the crux of his rationale as to why Marvin Lewis keeps coming back here. He's a guy he trusts. Clearly, he's trusting him for 17 years. So he trusts him in various capacities, and they have a good working relationship. So, I don't absolutely hate it, but I just wish I don't know. It just this proves to me that there's not going to this organization is not going to change what they do or who they are, and if they do, it's going to be an extremely painfully slow process to change some of the front office workings or what they don't do in the front office, employment status of front office employees, and all of that. So, but big news: Marvin Lewis signs a 2-year deal to remain the Bengals head coach shortly after the new year, and feelings are mixed at best amongst the fans. You can get in touch with us and let us know your feelings about Marvin Lewis returning to the Bengals. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @BengalsOBI. You can watch this show live every week on CincyJungle.com. And we also stream with a live chat, and you can talk with other Bengals fans through YouTube. We encourage you to join us. If you can't join us live, you can download the program on SoundCloud and on iTunes as well. We appreciate all the support, and we want to hear from you. Scott made a nice segue into our next segment, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on it because we've spent a lot of time on Marvin Lewis, which was the major news. And we've kind of hinted at it. It appears now, in case you haven't been caught up, the latest rumors and/or things that have been confirmed, it appears that Darren Simmons will remain the team's special teams coach. Bill Lazor will remain the team's offensive coordinator. Kyle Kasky will remain the team's running backs coach. Jonathan Hayes will remain the team's tight end coach. Okay? That's kind of some – in terms of coaches whose contract have expired and who they've re-upped and confirmed that they're going to stay. It appears – by a lot of rumors that Paul Guenther, because he was not given the opportunity to potentially be the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, will be moving on, leaving a void at defensive coordinator. And Paul Alexander, the guy who's been a coach with the Bengals and an assistant head coach since 1994, will not be returning. I'm getting the feeling that most people who were upset about Lewis coming back were maybe a little less or maybe even equally as excited to hear Paul Alexander not returning. But, Scott, I want to get your thoughts on that. And, should some of those guys who had been retained, should they not have? Or, are you happy about Guenther and Alexander? What do you think?
I think it's definitely a mixed bag because – and you kind of wonder, well, how much is that? Is it intentional or is it just kind of dumb luck the way it works? Because you get the disappointment that Lewis is back. And it seems by far and large, that by and large. Anyway, that by and large, most fans, most people who follow anything related to the Bengals or NFL or sports are just dumbfounded he's there. I think fans are very frustrated because – at the end of the day, the goal is to win, and Nick Hayes is a little above 500, but he's never won a playoff game. He's been to plenty of them, which is nice, but at some point you have to win one of them. At least dumb luck your way into a victory. And it's not like they're just getting beat like in the 2 Super Bowls where they just barely got beat by the 49ers. I mean, most of these games are, for the most part, pretty lopsided. In games that shouldn't be. Wildcard games, they're hosting at home against, like a 9-7 team like the Jets or the Chargers, who they're favored to win, pretty big, and they just look horrible. And so at the end of the day, I think most fans are like, okay, enough's enough. We've done that. We've been there, done that for 15 years. That hasn't changed. We just need something. Why in the heck are you giving us this? But one of the biggest problems, last couple of years was the offensive line. How it's just deteriorated. They let Zeitler go. They let Oboye go. They still have Bodine there, and they traded up for Bodine. They drafted Oboye in the first round, which some people were frustrated with. And so they've made some really bad offensive line decisions. You can go back, to the Mathis and Livingston, go back further. Some people think they might let Willie Anderson or Bobby Williams go to. So there's a lot of things they've kind of done over the years. And so you get to, that's where they've deteriorated that line and taken it from something that was really good to something that's become really bad. And it's been really bad internally because they're drafting guys. They're just not getting good ones, and they're not really signing people. They're not. And the big culprit is obviously Paul Alexander, because that's what he coaches. So you have to assume he has some sort of input in who the guys are that they're bringing in, who they're drafting. I mean, when they drafted Aboyhe, I think in the press conference, he was, saying how excited he was. And this guy was a high first-round pick, and they were so lucky and fortunate that he fell to them because he got hurt. And he was just this wonderful, and he's just been not anything but that. So it's kind of like, okay, we're going to dump this crappy news on you, but we don't want to lose you. We want you to keep buying tickets because we'll soften the blow with this other firing that'll make you happy. And I don't know if they're thinking that way, if they're thinking, hey, let's give you some lousy news, but follow it up with some really good news to keep you kind of where you're at, to keep you even keeled. So it came across that way. I don't think it was intentional. I think the general consensus is, when they talked about Marvin wanting more say, maybe that was the more say he wanted. But if that's the case, why isn't there more? Is that always going to get? And is it just like this little incremental thing? And then next year, if they fall flat, who's going to be the next scapegoat? Is it Bill Lazor? Is it Darren Simmons? At some point, you've got to run out of people to blame, and you have to point to Mike Brown and Marvin Lewis. You can't keep blaming. I mean, early in the year it was, it's the offensive coordinator. We got to get rid of him. He's just not getting it done. So they get rid of him after 2 games. And that first game, Andy Dalton's 5 interceptions or turnovers. All 5 of those were probably not on Ken Zampese. And some of them were bad reads, bad throws. The offense was horrible. It got better. But in the second half, the second half of games this year, it was horrible. So it's not like it's a whole lot better. And if we look, if we're middle of the road or 20th best offense next year, okay, we let Lazor go and then we bring someone else in, and ultimately someone's, the accountability's got to be at top. We just can't be blaming these assistant coaches. And so I don't know. It's very frustrating they didn't make more changes. And that's something I know you've been harping on, positive in a good way, not harping like negative. I don't know if harping's negative, but the idea that you need to have, do a clean sweep, just top to bottom, clean sweep. And of course they did the exact opposite, other than Paul Alexander and Gunther. So I don't know if that's exactly what you were hoping for.
I'm fine with Darren Simmons coming back. I'm fine with Kyle Kasky coming back. I'm fine with Jonathan Hayes coming back. I'm not sold on Bill Lazor. I'm not sold on that. That team could not run the football last year. Again, that also points to Paul Alexander. We talked about Paul Alexander on this program a few weeks ago, Scott, and we had said, the best years that Paul Alexander, and that really kind of built his resume, if you will, is when he had all the first-round picks, all the high picks on the line, and when it came time to developing guys that were either lower picks or if they were high picks and were raw and needed the developmental wasn't there. They had to be essentially pro-ready day one in order for that line to work. I mean, you saw 2005 through 2002 through 2007 or something. You had Levi Jones, you had Willie Anderson, you had Eric Steinbach, you had Rich, all these guys that were very good players, and it kind of made life easy for Paul Alexander. All of a sudden he kind of gets some lesser talent. The Bengals don't do what they need to do in free agency, and you kind of see what's happening there. What are we've talked a lot about Alexander. I think that's obviously, I think most people would say, yeah, time to go. He's got a good resume, but time to go. Time to start fresh there at least. What about Paul Gunther? I saw, if you look at Cincy Jungle, Josh Kirkendall put out a pretty nice, I think it was Josh, maybe it was somebody else, but they looked at some defensive stats under Paul Gunther, and there are some things that were really good and some things that were really bad. And obviously his unit has been decimated by injury, but it's not what it was under Mike Zimmer. I mean, let's just call that what it is. And I just kind of expected more from that defense, particularly against the run this year. They were atrocious against the run. So again, kind of mixed feelings. I don't mind seeing him go personally. What about you?
Let me try this again. I'm kind of middle of the road with him, where if they kept him, might have been okay. If they got rid of him, might have been okay. If you look at a lot of the different stats, points against, yards against, like and DVOA and some of his other whatever advanced statistics. He's kind of generally a middle of the road kind of guy. And very interestingly, his best year defensively was 2015 when the offense was fantastic, and his two worst years were the last couple where the offense was horrible. And I think that's one thing that plays really well, that kind of illustrates that offense and defense kind of go hand in hand. Kind of like in baseball, the guys who win the Gold Gloves are generally guys who are good hitters because those are the guys that writers know about. And same thing like on defense, if your offense is doing well, that inherently makes your defense better, even if you have the same coaches in the same unit, because in 2015, when they were jumping out in these big leads, they were scoring early, scoring often. The other team had to play catch up. They had to play many more passing downs to try to, and that let the Bengals, run that nickel they ran all the time, that let them, go after the quarterback. They didn't have to worry too much about the running game. And so it really limited what the opposing teams were doing offensively. And that really helps your defense if you can dictate what the offense is going to do. And so you saw the result. They finished second in scoring defense that year. Just had a great year, lots of sacks, everything went right. Okay, go to last year, 2016, total opposite. And even this year, the offense is horrible. They don't win time of possession. They can't keep the ball. They're punting it constantly. They're turning it over. They can't score in the second half. So what happens is the other team gets a lead. The Bengals can't catch up. So the other team is constantly running the clock, milking the clock. They can do whatever they want to do offensively because they aren't being forced into a particular style of gameplay. So your defense correspondingly is much harder because they're on the field more often and they don't get the same, basically the same type of plays to limit the opposing team to. I'm not sure if that's making any sense, but
no, it does.
I think the better your offense is, it helps your defense. And I think when you look at when the offense is great, the Bengals defense was great. When the offense is bad, kind of like Andy Dalton in the offensive line, he's only as good as the offensive line. So Paul Guenther, he doesn't seem to be a guy who's going to be able to have a great defense on its own that's going to stand on its own merits. I think it's got to be a product of things like great field position, great offense, things that help him do that. So that being said, he's kind of like a Marvin Lewis guy. Yeah, he's middle of the road. He's decent. You could do worse. You could definitely do better. And that goes to the hire. Who are they going to hire? Are they just going to promote someone like Coyle or Hazlitt and just make us go, seriously? Or are they going to make a hire that gets us excited?
Yeah. And I think you can agree that obviously the best years under Marvin, especially recently, came with guys that he hired at coordinator positions or what have you that have gone on to become, when he beefed up his staff with guys that were really became very high quality coaches, all of a sudden the team is playing its best football. Jay Gruden and Mike Zimmer together. Mike Zimmer and Hugh Jackson was on the staff in a number of different capacities. Vance Joseph was on the staff. So you're looking at 4 guys that were with the Bengals of recently that got head coaching jobs. And I think when you look at it, that's when the team was performing its best. That's when they had some very good players and were developing these late picks: Marvin Jones, George Aloka, and supplementing a bit more in free agency. Reggie Nelson, well, that was a trade, but you understand what I mean. They just did more. Their coaches got more out of the players, and when they lost those guys, especially lately, I think you really saw between the team, the deflation from losing this in that Steelers game again in the wild card round, losing Hugh Jackson, already losing Mike Zimmer. All of a sudden, then you don't do anything in free agency, and you really see the residual effect. I think Marvin Lewis is at his best when he has a high caliber staff. He's not a guy that, really grooms. I don't see him as a guy that grooms young newbie guys into these great coaches. Usually it's guys that have already had head coaching positions, have been around the league for a long time, have had a lot of respect. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree because, and one of the reasons I'm going to agree is I remember writing an article about that last year about when they started out kind of rough, talking about the brain drain and how just looking at the sheer number of offensive and defensive coaches, and not just the assistant coaches like the, Gruden and Zimmer and, Hugh Jackson and Vance Joseph going on to head jobs, but there were also some other key assistants who went. And I think it was something over like the stretch of 2 years. They had lost, I forget, it was 6 or 7, really good, really key assistant coaches. And you lose that many people that quickly, it's just hard to backfill them. And I think they'd also lost Mark Carrier was in there, and there are a couple other guys who all left around the same time. Like you said, they built that great run. I mean, there were several of the key things that went there. They had 2 great drafts in 2010, 2011. They got a lot of really good assistant coaches. You combine that, you have a good roster, good coaches. You put that all together. They had a run of 5 straight years that were really good. After that, all those assistant coaches are pretty much gone, the good ones. And then a lot of your better players, you kept some of them on second contracts. The rest disappeared, whether it be Zeitler and Whitworth and, Reggie Nelson. He wasn't drafted, but still, guys like him, guys like Marvin Jones, you saw those guys walk away. So you've seen that fall, and now you've got to rebuild that. And the frustrating thing is you have to rebuild that while your better players from 2010, 2011 are approaching, 30 years old. Dunlap, Atkins, those guys aren't getting any younger. So you've got to be a little more proactive, and you just can't say, oh, we'll just draft, because, okay, you throw in these 22-year-olds with these 30-year-olds, you've got to be able to bridge that gap with some free agents. You've got to be able to get those assistant coaches in there, the ones, and that was the thing that's kind of frustrating with them keeping as many as they did, because you're not able to bring in those good outside hires, those, the Vance Joseph, the Mike Zimmers, the guys who, came in and just really helped change this team into one that was winning every year. And it's hard to do that if you don't have the openings to bring those guys in.
Right. Yep. Great point. You are also the king of the segue tonight, my friend, because you mentioned Andy Dalton. And no offseason, especially a non-playoff one for the Bengals, would be complete without an Andy Dalton discussion. So Bill Lazor's back. Marvin Lewis is back. I think we all, as we sit here today, Andy Dalton's the guy in 2018. But to me, there's just some underlying things that could make this offseason pretty interesting. Back-to-back losing seasons, granted not his fault, not all his fault. You have now the A.J. McCarron situation, which is very interesting, whether he becomes a restricted free agent or an unrestricted free agent. If he becomes an unrestricted free agent, the Bengals kind of shot themselves in the foot with that whole thing, but whatever. There's that situation. Then there's the situation of a number of quarterbacks coming out in the NFL draft, and the Bengals, I believe, are slated to pick 12th. So with Josh Rosen, Sam Darnold declared today, so that's kind of a little bit of breaking news shortly before the show of USC. Josh Allen of Wyoming. There's potentially Lamar Jackson. There's a lot of guys, and then Baker Mayfield, of course, which a lot of Bengals fans would like. Is part of the rebuild, or is part of one of the concessions or whatever. Do you think Andy Dalton is involved in that, or is 2018 a bridge year where maybe they do draft a guy and they groom him behind Andy? Or are they just going to beef up around him like they have not done the past 2 off seasons and ride with him?
That was probably one of the reasons I was most excited about a new coach, because generally one of the first things coaches do is bring in their own quarterback. So the thought was, hey, if we get this new coach, you're probably more likely to get a new quarterback. And as you mentioned, there's so many supposedly in this draft this year. And until they do things like pro days and senior bowls and combines and all that stuff, we really don't know where they're going to shake out. I think about this time 2 years ago, Carson Wentz wasn't really on a radar, and then he kind of came up out of nowhere. Opinions were mixed on Jared Goff until later in the draft process, and it's kind of the same thing last year with the guys that how they were going to rank. Mahomes kind of was a late riser, and some of his other folks. So it's really hard to know today. But regardless, it does seem like there's going to be a number of them who would be considered first, second round picks. Whether, in 4 months we think they're all franchise guys, or whether we think they're all just, solid, Andy Dalton types, remains to be seen. But the interesting thing is I think that they do have to make some sort of decision. Personally, I'd love to see him draft a guy, put that guy in there, do something with McCarron. You have to trade him, or he's not staying. Either he's leaving as a free agent or he's leaving this year or next year, some point. There's no reason to keep him around. You can't drag him around forever. And that was the other thing too, is, okay, now you have Lewis. So that pretty much implies Dalton staying. Lewis has said over and over and over again, Dalton's my starter, McCarron's our backup, and that doesn't seem to be changing, unfortunately, because at some point you'd like to see something else happen, but since it isn't, since you pretty much are locked in, Lewis and Dalton are kind of attached to the hip, so you're going to have Dalton as your starter. I'd be very surprised to see that change. You never know, but I'd be really surprised to see that change, and I'd be really surprised to see him draft a quarterback. I'd like to see him do it, especially if there's that many good ones there and one of them falls. I think I'd argue the single most important position on a NFL team is the quarterback. If you can get elite quarterback. Now, if you decide none of them are elite, then if they're just Dalton level, okay, then screw it. There's no reason to reach for one in the first round. But if you determine that, hey, Lamar Jackson, Darnold, Rosen, whoever, we think these 2 or 3 guys are elite and one of them's still there, you absolutely have to take that. Because you can look at, what have guys like Luck and Peyton Manning done for the Colts? When they, when the Colts didn't have one of them, they're just horrible. When they do, they're a totally different team. Aaron Rodgers this year, and I think back in 2009 when he was hurt, their win-loss record of winning with and without him is totally different. The Packers just aren't a good team. You throw Aaron Rodgers on there, and all of a sudden they're a great team. You look at, what Peyton Manning did when he went to Denver. They were a decent team. He got there. They're great. Now they're back to being mediocre again. And you see that with like Drew Brees when the years in New Orleans before him and then after him. And here's some examples of how that elite quarterback totally changes that team. And so if he's there, you have to I'll be on that door. You have to take him regardless of who you have. Now, if you don't think anyone elite, then okay.
Yeah. So interesting stuff. Carson Palmer played 8 years in Cincinnati. Andy Dalton's entering his 8th year. Neither of them won playoff games. Now, you got to give the team credit, and you got to maybe give Marvin Lewis credit. I mean, after what happened in the decade plus after Boomer Esiason, they figured out continuity and productive continuity at quarterback. Now, it didn't add any postseason wins, but essentially they've basically played. John Kitna was 1 year. Carson Palmer started the other 7. Ryan Fitzpatrick took over one of those years from Carson Palmer after he got hurt in a couple of games into that season, that 2008 season, and then Andy Dalton essentially. So, I mean, they've had a pretty solid run of continuity at quarterback under Marvin Lewis. You got to like that. But here's the thing to me, and this plays into, we can kind of make this about Andy Dalton's future, but I also want to make it a little bit about that series we've done about how to fix the Bengals. You got to decide one way or the other. You either need to, at this point, we know who Andy Dalton is. At his best, he's solid to pretty good. I mean, there's the 2015 season and the 2013 season where there was a lot of nice games in there, but at best, he's pretty good. I think the team has let him down specifically on the offensive line and other areas like wide receiver because of free agency attrition the past couple of years. They need to make a concerted decision. On one hand, it's either stick with Andy Dalton, absolutely beef up the offensive line this offseason, maybe get him another receiving tight end threat, re-sign Eifert, whatever that looks like, but surround him with a lot of offensive talent, particularly on the offensive line, to help him out. And we say, maybe if we just absolutely have a beast of an offensive line again, we've got a couple of talented running backs, Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon. You've got AJ Green still. You've got John Ross waiting in the wings. Maybe then you say that's the formula to move on to and through the postseason. The other thing, and it plays to your point, Scott, and this is the way I think, unfortunately, this is going to have to happen because of who they brought back at head coach, who they brought back at offensive coordinator. You are going to need to find, and this is a decision they will have to make, a transcendent type of talent at quarterback. And you will need to find a quarterback, like you said, that could potentially outplay and overcome the shortcomings of the organization, the shortcomings of the coaching staff. And this draft has a lot of guys. Now, everybody has their guy in the quarterback spot. this year. Some people hate Sam Darnold. Some people love him. Some people love Josh Rosen. Some people don't like him. Some people like Baker Mayfield. Some people think he's too short. Whatever your thought process is, if you are the Cincinnati Bengals and you think you have a transcendent talent at quarterback sitting in your lap, that might be the route you need to go, that can, as a guy that can elevate, like you mentioned, Peyton Manning elevating the Denver Broncos, Aaron Rodgers elevating the Green Bay Packers, Brett Favre before him. I don't know exactly which is the right route because, like Marvin Lewis, Andy Dalton is a very polarizing player. You like him as a guy. He's productive as a quarterback. He's had a lot of regular season wins, but he hasn't gotten the team there. Then you roll the dice on a quarterback. I just think if you feel you've got a transcendent guy there, maybe you pull the trigger.
When you look at they often claim they are a best player available team. I don't know if they outright say it, but that seems to be the approach they take. So if they truly are, and you have that transcendent quarterback, he is the best player available. So you've absolutely got to take him, be it Darnold or Hill or, Allen or Jackson, whoever it is. If it turns out, and I don't care, if they have Andy Dalton locked up for cheap for 10 years. You look what the Packers did when they had Brett Favre and they drafted Aaron Rodgers. You'd be like, what in the heck are you doing? You already have that transcendent guy, and he's signed for a few more years. He wasn't that old at the time. But they had enough sense to know that, we normally don't draft very well. We don't have good teams. We have this incredible quarterback, and that's the one thing that sustains us. We think this guy's the next one. We have to get him because at some point we're not going to have Favre. Favre's not going to play till he's 50, even though, ESPN stories every week. It's like, is he going to retire? Is he going to retire? Is he going to retire? Because they're looking for stories, and they kept pushing that, and eventually he did, or he moved on to the Vikings or wherever he went, Jets, and then Rodgers took over, and they've been able to continue that success just based on that one position. So if you think that guy's there, you have to take. If they don't grab that guy, like you said, they have to do everything in their power to get a Dallas Cowboys type of offensive line. Free agency, draft, whatever you can do, because that's what you're going to. Now, I think Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon are good enough. They can make people miss. They can create. But it sure helps if they can do that 5 yards down the field and not 5 yards in the backfield. That's a big difference if you're, dodging guys to go, make a gain from 5 yards to 10 yards instead of dodging guys just to get to the line of scrimmage. So if you can do that, and if you can give Andy Dalton time, because he's, I think fans have probably grown sick and tired of seeing him just chuck the ball out of bounds whenever he gets any sort of pressure. Yeah. It'd be nice because when he doesn't get pressure, he seems to be a fairly decent quarterback. Maybe his deep ball accuracy isn't there, but generally he's going to find an open guy. Generally he's going to make a good throw. He can make throws in tight windows at times if you give him that time. He's not the guy that's going to do that, when he's rushed. When he's rushed, it's like, okay, let me find the guy, row 3, section 219, just toss it over there. But when he has the time, he generally is a solid quarterback. And so if you can give him any sort of pass protection, and so they have to decide, because you can't do both. You can't use the first round pick and all your free agency money on both. So it's either you're going to build the line like crazy, stick with what you have otherwise, or you go with that next, that guy that's going to be the next, what they wanted Carson Palmer to be. Yep.
And you run the risk there too, because if you throw a rookie quarterback behind an offensive line that we saw from the Cincinnati Bengals this year, all of a sudden you're looking at a David Carr or a different kind of situation there, and you don't want that. But I think this is an appropriate discussion, and I don't want to. I'm not the guy that shoves Andy Dalton out the door, but I think with if you have minimal changes on the coaching staff, and it's the same quarterback, you need to make a very tough business decision. And it's either, hey, we're going to spend a hell of a lot of money in free agency, and we're going to move around in the draft and really surround Andy Dalton with a lot of talent, and we're going to get a coach, an offensive line coach, who can potentially develop Jake Fisher and Cedric Ogbuehi into viable starters. Or you say, hey, got to start it over, even if it's a bridge year for Andy Dalton where he's the starter and a young guy is behind him. maybe that's the way that they took. And I don't know if that was part of the discussions that took place between Mike Brown and Marvin Lewis, but it will be interesting to see how that plays out and how the A.J. McCarron thing plays out and everything about the quarterback position plays out in the coming draft. We're going to get out of here in just a few minutes. We've got a couple of questions. Hopefully you can stick around, Scott. I know it's late on your end, but if you are new to the program, please join us live every episode. We usually record Wednesday evenings, so please come join us. You can talk with other Bengals fans in our live YouTube chat, or you can watch it on cincyjungle.com. If you can't join us live, we are on SoundCloud and YouTube for downloading, and you can get in touch with the program with comments, questions, anything like that on Twitter at BengalsOBI on Twitter, and the obinsider@gmail.com via email. Thank you for all of your support. Quick one here, Scott. We've kind of talked about it a little bit. I think this one, we got it via Twitter. Let me see if I could pull up the user who sent it. But essentially it was, it's at Ugly Boy Drew. Tweeted, what defensive coordinator options are out there or preferable now that Paul Guenther appears to be leaving. I think there are a handful of names that are floating out there. I'm seeing one quite frequently in the YouTube chat, but do you have any off the top of your head that you can think, wow, that'd be a good fit for the Bengals and a pretty impressive hire?
Off the top of my head, it's very hard to say. I haven't dug a whole lot into it because until recently we didn't know Guenther was leaving. One name that came up on the Cincy Jungle site was Jack Del Rio as a possibility. He's someone I actually like. I would not trust him to draft for anything. I would keep him as far away from the draft room as I could. Kind of like if we were to hire Josh McDaniels, I think what they do well, but one thing they don't do well is drafting. So I would not let Jack Del Rio anywhere near the draft room. I think he killed the Jaguars, set them back for many years with some horrid drafts. Outside of that, he was a pretty good coach. So he was someone who I would see as a possibility. I don't know if that's something the Bengals would do. It'd be very interesting to see if they – I think looking at their last few defensive coordinators who came from outside, Mike Zimmer was a defensive coordinator elsewhere. I think it was with the Cowboys. So it'd be interesting to see if there's another defensive – and I don't know why you would take a lateral move unless you just feel your team wants to get rid of you. So without digging too deep, I'm not too sure. So just to throw a name out, I'm just going to throw out Jack Del Rio because he was a popular name on Cincy Jungle last couple days.
Yeah, Jack Del Rio is one that I've seen a lot of on Cincy Jungle and in the YouTube chat. My worry is, I think, when he was defensive coordinator in Denver recently before he got the job in Oakland, and even sometimes in Oakland, there was some more 3-4 looks, with Khalil Mack kind of playing more of a tweener edge rusher role. So I just worry about fit a little bit there. But I know he's got a great relationship with Marvin Lewis. Jack Del Rio's been a pretty solid NFL coach throughout his career, even though he hasn't won the big games. He's been a solid coach, a solid defensive coordinator. So that is a good name. I think there's another one that someone threw out. That was interesting. Gus Bradley, that could be an interesting one. I do not want the Bengals to promote from within with Jim Haslett. I think they need new blood there. That's just my thought. I think the Bengals need to move on and get a new guy in there. One other guy that has a good rapport with Marvin Lewis and has a defensive background and was just let go was John Fox. Fox is a guy who has built his reputation on defense and has had some very successful runs with teams, Denver Broncos, Carolina Panthers. But, again, hasn't won the big Super Bowl or anything like that, has had some tough years recently. But he and Marvin are really tight. They've done USO tours together, and they're good friends. So that could be another name to watch as well. I would like a big name guy like one of those three guys who have had even some head coaching experience in the NFL. And I think that brings a whole new level of, accountability and all of that. And, even if it's a short-term deal where those guys get hired for another head coaching job down the line, we're only talking about a 2-year deal with Lewis as of right now. Could change again down the road, but as of now, we're thinking short term. So I think the Bengals need to go outside and get a pretty big name. One other that I saw, I believe it was from Waldo. It was about what to do with Tyler Eifert. That's a great question. I think you throw a big contract in front of him, but the contract that you throw in front of him has to be heavily incentive-laden based on playing time, based on statistical performance. I think at this point, Tyler Kroft came up, and I believe he had 6 touchdowns this season in relief of Tyler Eifert. Eifert is who he is when he's healthy. He's a stud, but he can't stay healthy. Uzama, I'd like to see them. If Eifert goes, they need to add another tight end for sure, and not necessarily in the first round or anything like that, but probably second, third round. They need to start thinking about another tight end in this year's draft, or if there's a good veteran on the market, that could be another guy that could be a stopgap type of option. But I do think I would like to see Eifert re-signed or even franchise tagged, whatever the case may be. Franchise is a little tricky because you got to pay that guy a lot of money, and Eifert just can't stay healthy. So, this is a really hard thing. I think Tyler Eifert likes to play for the Bengals. I think there will be a lot of calls to him from other teams. And there's no doubt that when he's healthy and on the field, he's going to be a starter for the Bengals. That's not in question. It's just, what kind of contract would he be willing to accept from the Bengals? And you also have to understand, Eifert's undergone a lot of surgeries the last couple of off seasons as well. Back surgeries. A couple of years ago, he had an ankle deal. He had the dislocated elbow. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff that could linger. And that's something else the Bengals need to be aware of. But I would be happy with a contract that could potentially pay him a lot of money, top tight end type of money, but it has to be performance-based. Otherwise, the Bengals will handcuff themselves, and I think we'll get more and more frustrated with Eifert not being on the field if that's the case. He proved in a contract year he couldn't stay on the field again. So if you franchise tag him, isn't that kind of the same deal? I don't know. But I'd like to see him back with Cincinnati, but it has to be fair for both sides. And what that looks like, I'm not completely sure, but I think it needs to be a very, very heavily incentive-laden type of deal where he could potentially make a lot of money if he's out there on the field and producing. And if he's not, then, it is what it is. And I'm very interested to see the level of interest other teams would have in a guy like Eifert. And, there are a lot of teams who, quote unquote, win the month of March in terms of free agency. And maybe it's a team that already has a pretty viable tight end and they want to go after him and get another guy. And maybe even though he's kind of a 1A or a number 2 even on a team that wins a lot of games, maybe that's something that's appealing to him, where he's not taking the beating of being kind of the almost every down type of tight end that he is with the Bengals. I don't know. I do know the tight end is a very tough position on the body. Not only are you blocking and chipping big players on the defensive line, but obviously you are going across the middle, taking big hits and all of that. It's a position that's very important in football, and it's a position that does take a beating. So that's another important decision the Bengals need to make, and I think they need to tread lightly and wisely when they dole out a contract offer to Tyler Eifert. That's going to do it for us tonight, guys. We went a little while talking about the coaching situations. Obviously, that's kind of the majority of the questions, and I don't want to rehash a lot of those. But thank you all so much for tuning in live. Thank you all for your questions and comments. Again, you can get the program on SoundCloud and on iTunes. You can join us live on YouTube and at cincyjungle.com. for the program every episode. We'll still be coming at you this offseason. There's a lot to talk about before you know it. Free agency is around the corner, and then the draft. And especially as you get older, if you notice how fast time goes, that'll be coming around the corner before you know it. Again, Happy New Year to everybody. Thank you all so much for your support of this program. We greatly appreciate it. And I hope 2018 will be good to you and good to the Bengals. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next episode.